Heavy is the Crown. Chapter 5. Convergence, Prologue. The Convergence is the one true test for an individual. As a marksman's true skill is shown in their aim, the Convergence true test is to point an individual in the direction of their powers and make them one. Said by the Vigil. Excelsa was visibly disturbed. He knew why the law had been made. It was a protection for the two kingdoms. At the end of the last war, the two kings had made an agreement as part of the peace treaty. No development of any kind of technology. If technology was implemented into weapons, millions more would die. Killing innocents would become easier, emotionless even. So, to protect the millions of people under their care, technology was made illegal. This law had a very positive effect, but for certain people it was seen as a hindrance. One person who had been developing technology and was attempting to build a technology center completely under his control through his thoughts. A ridiculous undertaking considering the animosity for what he was doing. He wanted to create an advanced way of researching the stars and rebuilding homes that were destroyed. Space travel and research on the abilities and forces. All of this came to an abrupt halt when Ignatius ordered the end of tech. This person was Ryunuk. Ryunuk was banished for trying to keep his work. He was allowed to live in the city, but his public denunciation made it difficult to socialize. A genius who had a vast understanding of technology, mathematics, and astronomy. This was the man whom Themis knew, and whose help he needed. Ryunuk slept inside a bunker he had built for months at a time, where he had recreated many of his ideas, including a theory on creating new elements. This convergence desperately needed the skill of such a man. As Themis went to Ryunuk, Excelsa and his father spoke. That law was made to protect us, and all forms of tech were nullified and destroyed 25 years ago. If we bring it back, the threat of war with more casualties arises. Is there no other way? Excelsa asked. Ignatius had a weight in his eyes as he replied to his son. Bartholomew wants you to be forced to use your powers. We can't do that here in our borders, not on a grand scale like we agreed with him. The arena needs to be elsewhere. Themis has an idea, and perhaps will have a location too. We cannot use that amount of tech in the city. It will raise a threat to Zatliv and be counterproductive to the peace we're trying to keep. You need to train and prepare yourself for the convergence. Excelsa knew the gravity of the situation. He didn't know where it would be possible to have a convergence where the threat of what was possible in war would be kept at bay. As they arrived back in the palace, Excelsa went to tell his sister what had happened. His sister was upset. What? What is Dad thinking, letting you be that king's puppet? No escape plan? You don't even know where it's happening, and you have to use your powers. It's a death trap. Do they think you a monkey at the market who's just gonna perform tricks for them? Okay, you're being a little dramatic, sis. I don't like it either. But the other option is war. Tech is a worry. Me surviving this is a risk, but it's the right thing to do, Excelsa explained. The two siblings stared outside through the window. They were sitting on a red couch which they oftentimes sat at watching the rain. What was it like using your powers, Excelsa? Because mine was like the feeling of peace. Excelsa's reply showed his novelty with his powers. For those who had ability, this was the easiest question, even easier than answering what their own name was. He was as if stunted in growth up until this point, with a tidal wave's worth of power over 2 decades having built up. Well, it felt like a calling, like there was a key to unlock something. But before I could figure out what happened, it was over. I was shut out. As his sister took some water out of a nearby glass and shaped it into various snowflake-looking water flakelets, as she called it, she asked him with curiosity, "Have you tried using your powers since, or figuring out what exactly you can do?" Excelsior laughed with embarrassment, the nerves in his voice giving way to the answer before he even spoke. "No, I did kind of try, sort of, but I can't feel anything. No connection. No spark. It's weird, really." Vicelia drifted into thought, wondering about her brother's powers. Were they similar to hers? What would this convergence mean for them? She promised herself to protect him and stay by his side in the convergence. Tech being used brought another realization to birth. Nothing would be the same. The advances it would bring would shape a new future. Keeping it away from the military would be of utmost importance. Excelsior hugged his sister, kissing her on her forehead. While walking to his room, he had his own thoughts. The future king, general of the Phagatorex, and now someone who had no idea what to do or to think. This convergence had shrouded itself in mystery. Hardened details would be essential for him to prepare mentally. As he walked into his room, a note was there from his father, in his father's writing, which was quite rare. It said, "I will give you 3 days rest, or you can start immediately if you want. I think you would pick the last option. When you go to the royal castle, ask for the elder. I have already informed him about the situation. You can answer his other inquiries. Good luck, son. Let the forces guide you." Excelsior had no idea who the elder was, but his father was right. He wanted to start immediately. He put the note inside a file of his personal keepsakes before heading off to bed. The night's sleep would be heavy for him, exhausted from the day and partially drained from his power burst. The next morning raised multiple tasks of importance that the shadows cast by the rising sun would not pay attention to. Themis, though, would. He was on his way to Ryunuk, walking to one of the more quiet residential areas of Titania. The path was made from a white limestone and the buildings from a brick created using the same material. It made a beautiful, bright area with the vanilla trees that blossomed in the center through the whole pathway. The scent made it quite relaxing. Themis reached the building and knocked on the well-varnished wooden door in fine condition. He had to knock twice before finally having the door open up before him. He gestured his guards to wait outside while he went in. "To what do I owe this great honor?" Ryunuk asked sarcastically. "You know, I was wondering about needing to break down your door to get in. Don't make me regret leaving that door on its hinges. Besides, it's only been 3 weeks since I last came," Themis said. "You know, it's basically my greeting for you since you became the king's advisor." "What do you want to drink?" Ryu asked him. "Nothing at all, but this time I actually may have a great honor for you. The king's son has to be tested in a convergence of unprecedented level. It's an attempt to keep the only other option, which is the threat of war, away. I'll need your help. We need your help. Meet me at your original planned science center. Please come," Themis finished off. "That sounds messy, mixed with a pinch of certain disaster, but as a publicly disgraced individual, what's in it for me? Will I be cleared? What do you need from me exactly?" Ryunuk inquired. Themis answered him, "I can't tell you all the specifics yet, but yes, you will be cleared of the disgrace. That I can assure you is on the table. I'll see you there in a couple of minutes, it seems." The building, which would have been the Ryuza Technesis had the law against tech not been passed, was run down. Upkeep and maintenance had only been carried out on the exterior. Soldiers were busy cleaning up, sweeping and mopping the floors, and removing as many cobwebs as was possible. For a project that would be backed royally, this was disastrous as a start. Eventually, the area was ready. Ryu Nook arrived. He walked through as Themis showed him the full extent of the 3-story building. It had an area where all 3 floors overlooked a hall. It was familiar to him, but had been years since he was in this building. During the tour, the king arrived along with the prince and princess. Ryu Nook bowed. If it wasn't for his technical endeavors, he was a model citizen. He was trying to better Titania. His life had been turned upside down by what had happened. Now, Titania needed him. I hope you understand what's at stake, the peace of nations, my son's life, and now possibly your legacy. The convergence cannot happen here in Titania, so you will need to make a plan regarding its location. All tech, rules, hindrances, prohibitions, laws, regulations, and any bans are lifted for you. Basically, anything that stands in your way. Do what you must. Force them to use their powers. Test them. You define the rules. I am backing you. Anything you need, Themis can arrange. Excelsior would like to keep you company if you allow it. Ignatius' instructions were given with great authority. He pulled Ryu to the side. I know we have had a major disagreement when I passed these laws, but I am sorry for the effects it had on your life, and how it may have affected you socially. It's just words, but I wasn't trying to ruin your life personally. Just trying to protect everyone, and I hope I can make amends now that things have changed. Good luck. Ryu Nook seemed anxious, but agreed to what was said, and was willing to have Excelsior around. The two were alike in many ways, having had similar lives and having their talents scrutinized and completely shut down. They had been isolated and told that they were the cause of many current and future issues. Ryu Nook had created a means of manufacturing elements, but to produce these at great quantity, he would need to create a factory of sorts. He decided the best option was at the river as a source of power. The 37-year-old had spent 25 years in a bunker, tinkering away from the eyes which he felt were trying to trap him in disdain, to pull him towards the dark and isolate him. As the soldiers went to work on the factory, Ryu Nook explained his plan to the prince. He would try to hold the convergence on its own planet. A nearby orange planet with major areas of purple, what seemed to be oceans. This was his target. Then, on the planet, they would construct the arena. I know about a person who can open portals. I want to see how he does it, so that I can use his powers and replicate it on a bigger scale to open a portal to the planet, and not drain a Titan, because it would use a lot of his energy, I would imagine. They call him Gateway. Please let me observe him. He won't be hurt, asked Ryu. As a messenger went to ask the vigil for the information about who this was in the next room, the prince and Ryu Nook looked at the plans for the arena that was being drawn up. The metal that Ryu had taken to calling adaptium would be used. The metal was quite intricate and intelligent, a masterpiece of science and a baffling combination of titanium, emerald, and platinum. It wasn't just produced, it was grown. It could be pre-engineered while in solid block state to form whatever was required. The machine which would produce the adaptium was assembled. Ryu had built it using a small atomizer, the device which could insert instructions into the adaptium. While in his self-imposed exile, he had managed to manually produce enough of the metal to create this most vital machine. Now, the resource would be in a quantity plentiful enough to create his arena. The Vigil had begun going through his records during this time, and had found Gateway, a young man named Ethan Samuels. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. His freckles and dimples made him quite the attractive man. But his journey in a previous convergence 3 years ago resulted in him unlocking his abilities. The ability to open portals. He had once tried to open a portal to Zatlev, but the power of the Verge meant he broke his hand trying to, and ultimately failing. Ethan was now on his way to the Technesis. He held a key to the Convergence not being held on the planet of Dwight. Ignatius had left Ryunuk to his work, as he had duties too, with a nearby village suffering a threat from a tribe in the mountains. While he was working, he called his daughter to help him in his kingly affairs. Theseus had left in a hurry to carry out a royal edict as Vicelia entered the room. Her and Ignatius would meet the two leaders of the village and tribe respectively and create a situation for peace. These skirmishes were a nuisance, and many a time the Phagothorax had gotten involved. When Gateway arrived at the Technesis and went to be observed by Ryunuk, Excelsa left to meet with the Elder to begin his training for the Convergence. The Elder was an old man named Clegaeus Talskin, a twin of his brother with the same name, except his parents used a C instead of a K. They were almost identical twins if it wasn't for Clegaeus being blonde and living in Zatlev. They were separated when they were 17, after using their powers to separate a weapon they had found. The twins were 129 years old. They had been given the titles and responsibilities of elders. They would train, prepare, and help anyone who wanted assistance to control and understand their powers. It was this very experienced individual that Excelsa went to seek out to train him for the Convergence. As soon as he arrived, Excelsa could see who it was. Black hair with a well-kept beard, his bronze-brown eyes reading a scroll that was probably older than his soon-to-be student. Clegaeus looked up with disdain and said, "So, Your Highness, you are the person who I was told about, my new student." He raised a hand off the wooden desk made from an ancient Alexandrian tree and opened it up, letting pieces of paper fall on the desk before continuing. "A spoilt brat who has no respect or understanding for what he is about to learn. Your father says you are eager. I sense fear. I can sense your saliva pooling up as your nerves increase. But I'm sure you want to tell me otherwise. After all, what is over a century of life?" After swallowing, Excelsa stood there with his mouth slightly open, hands behind his back. He pondered for a moment about what to say to the Elder. "I'm here to learn," he said, as his body stiffened and his eyes hit the floor. This area was the royal training castle. Underneath the main palace, and the biggest training area was under the cave of entrance. The Elder had built this miniature arena, and it had endless rooms as rooms were added for each force. The rooms could only be unlocked by using that particular force which corresponded to the room. Some rooms needed concentration and endurance, while others needed intellect to be unlocked. Clegaeus looked at him as he got up and walked towards the large training hall. Standing in front of the door he had opened, he said, "I'm not going to beg you to follow me. I know what happens when someone who has authority, never seen what the common people has faced, has everything done for them. I know what can happen. You are the first royal who has been down here in years, and you only here because you're afraid. You need help, and been hiding from your powers for years." Excelsa followed him into the room. The room was wider than the cave of entrance, which allowed the waterfall to adorn the sides of the training hall. "I know what you think, but these powers killed my mother and my life. They're not some gift. They terrify me. I used them to save those kids because my emotions overpowered me. I do care about my people. It's why I lived the way I have," Excelsa explained. The Elder shook his shoulders. "You haven't used your powers since then, because you don't trust yourself and you don't trust your own abilities." As he finished speaking, he went to the grey agate rock shelves where he picked up a weapon. "Do you know what this is?" The hammer had a long handle, partly being an axe and a hammer. It had a red color with whatever powering it looking like a red dust. Excelsa smiled and said, "Yes, it's the hammer of Inzel from the dimension of chaos. There are two. You and your brother separated the full hammer, trapping him inside the chaos dimension. the only universe which can't be entered or exited without a way to connect to it. You were both separated, along with your hammers, to make sure Inzel never returns." The elder looked at the hammer and nodded. "At least you know your history. Now let's see what you are. The test is simple. You need to get to that wall behind me. You will be the only weaponless individual in the Convergence, so you will not have one now." Excelsa took a deep breath. He looked to the wall. How hard could it be? He ran across the room, then down to his knees as he slid under the hammer before using his legs to launch himself towards the wall. As soon as he landed, he felt something on his leg. A ribbon of red dust as he was pulled and thrown, sliding down the length of the room. Don't just rely on yourself. Try and use what you feel. Your ability to connect to a force is like wind in your hands, but when you grab hold of it, trust it. It will solidify. The cells and atoms of your body will communicate with the force and allow you to tap into it, shape it, or otherwise control it, Brigeus explained. Using the hammer, the elder moved water from the falls, making it spiral around him silently, before you could hear as the droplets formed into a chain of water, spinning and twisting into a helix. The hammer had been spinning in the hands of the elder, but now the red chaos dust had taken over. Only one flat hand in control of the hammer and the water. It was exquisite and beautiful. I don't doubt what will happen, and I can always feel the forces I am able to control, Brigeus finished off. As the elder put the hammer's head down on the ground, the water dropped, splattering on the floor. Excelsa closed his eyes. He could feel the water, the marble floor on which it laid. He could feel the imprint of footsteps through the water. He dropped to his knees, hands beside him open. The water rose off the ground, moving towards him as he combined it into a staff. As he held it, it felt solid. It all felt so familiar. The elder looked at him with a smile for the first time. He spoke, quite intrigued. "You were born for this. The force of water trusts you. How remarkable! It's one thing for a person to control a force, another for the force to trust and respect you." Excelsa put the water into a vase, guiding it with his fingers. As he put the water on the shelf, his eyes caught an inscription on the wall. "This leads to the library of weapons, doesn't it? What do you know about the Spear of Forces?" "Another lesson," the elder answered. "Don't let your mind wander. I will not answer side questions again. The spear has never been seen. It disappears when no one who is worthy exists, and in order to be worthy, you would need to have all of the trust of all forces in existence, some of which no one has discovered. It's arguably the most powerful weapon ever heard of. In comparison, my hammer is third or fourth when wielded by Inzel. Now back to our training." A knock on the door stopped them in their tracks. It was Themis. "I have something to tell you from Ryu and your father. Ryu has discovered a way to use Gateway's power to open a portal. He would like you to come see it when you are available. He has also produced enough adaptium to create the arena. Apparently, the planet he intends to use is small, but large enough for the Convergence. Your father, though, wants you to take some of the Phagothorax and bring the adaptium to the Technesis." "Excelsa," the elder said, "I want you to feel everything you can while carrying out this duty. Be at one with all that exists. Don't fear it. Embrace it. I hope to see you again before you go. Remember, it's not that you don't know or have the ability. You are holding yourself back." Excelsa nodded as he hurried off to carry out his father's request. When Excelsa arrived at the adaptium factory, loading of the goods started immediately, about 100 wagons worth in total. The soldiers were taking it from a higher platform onto the wagon using a pulley system. Excelsa had been trying to feel every atom of what was possible on his ride to the factory. He could feel the light, and gravity combined with the vibrations through the planet's crust. Standing on the platform, he watched his men load the wagons. The soldier next to him slipped. Excelsior quickly grabbed hold of the adaptium load and lifted it into the wagon itself without a strain. Excelsior had just saved the soldier's life. When the soldier had slipped, he had let go of the rope of the pulley with over 300 kilograms of adaptium. He would have been crushed if it wasn't for the prince. Excelsior stood there thinking as he looked at the adaptium. Was this another ability of his? After the loading had been done, and the soldiers had ensured it was all securely fastened, they began the return trip to the Technesis to see what Ryu had come up with and offload all the adaptium. The precious metal would be placed in the hall until the building process would begin. How was the training, Excelsior? Ready to see some technical wonders this evening? Ryu asked. I'm actually kind of tired after today, but technical wonders would be great tomorrow. If it happens tomorrow, then I'm all in. Training was eventful. I mean, cut short to get all these adaptium blocks, but honestly enough to make me question myself more than I did before. I'll just help you tomorrow if that's okay. It's late, and we should get back for dinner. Dad wouldn't be too happy if you didn't join us, was Excelsior's reply. You look disturbed. I know how you feel. People are afraid of me too. It's just because they can separate me from my talent. It makes them feel they still have control. You don't need to be afraid. I heard what you did and what people started sharing around the kingdom. You get to make them see what you are, and only you decide that. I'm looking forward to spending more time with you, Ryu told him. Excelsior and Ryu walked in silence to the dinner. Both had their minds on what was to be done tomorrow. Tears were forming in the prince's eyes. Ryu noticed and gave him a warm hug. The dinner was a delight of perfectly roasted chicken with potatoes and other vegetables. A creamy sauce with a hint of heat acted as a sort of palate cleanser. Where is Theseus? Asked Excelsior. He's on an errand of mine, answered his father. That conversation was probably the highlight of an exhausted dinner. Everyone went to bed early. There had been a message from Zatlev. It had only been about 3 days, but Bartholomew was growing irritable at no announcement of the Convergence. Excelsior's mind was constantly racing, as was his sister's. At least sleep gave them some rest from their thoughts. The next morning, after a rather simple breakfast of oats, toast, and coffee, the king was ready to see the progress being made in the Convergence. Visalia, King Ignatius said as he put down his mug of coffee. I want you to gather those of age for the Convergence. Ask for volunteers and only accept those. But before you do that, write to Zatlev, make sure they have their participants. Excelsior, you will help Ryu. Ryu, I need the Convergence to happen tomorrow. Bartholomew is thinking I'm planning a military uprising. I don't want war. Get it done, please. Visalia got up and left to write to Zatlev. Ryu raised his hand as if in class. I'm not sure how it works to speak, but I'll need half your army to help me once I open the portal today. Ignatius nodded. A quarter of the army is with Theseus. I'll give you what remains, except for 100,000 soldiers in case anything happens. Get to work. Excelsior and Ryu left to begin their work. Gateway was already at the Technesis to meet them. As Ryu prepared the atomizer to install instructions in a piece of adaptium, Excelsior asked a question. So, how does he open the portals? Ryunuk answered. It's quite intricate. His body creates an X-hormone basically. It's what I call exotic matter. I've never seen anything like it. So, he thinks about where he wants to go, right? His hands get coated with this exotic matter at the cellular level. It basically becomes an extra cell. Then, his hands gather the atoms of air and connect them, coating it too with exotic matter. The matter pulls it as far apart as he wants it to go, opening the portal. The exotic matter forms a connection through space and then you travel through it. Excelsa laughed with raised eyebrows. He does all that naturally with a thought. It's incredible. Placing the block of adaptium in the hall, Ryunok used the atomizer to give the blueprints for the portal. The metal began to stir, vibrating and humming as it lit up in a stunning yellow, as it began building itself into an archway and then solidifying itself into shape, and then a crackling before a huge boom, and the portal opened. Ryunok stepped through. It was spectacular. He had breached a scientific milestone. As he stepped back, he let out a huge sigh. "It works," he said, holding a graphite stone from the other planet. Excelsa hugged him. "You are a genius. Let's build this arena. I want to see what you got planned." Honestly, I should not be so excited. Excelsa ordered one of his guards to bring the Phagothorax. Ryunok went to look at his notes as he began to place instructions into the atomizer. Excelsa's newfound strength came in handy as he moved the blocks of adaptium to where Ryunok was working. In a matter of minutes, the Phagothorax arrived. They would work in groups of 6, along with horses and carts, to place the adaptium where Ryunok had marked out. By the time the first block was in position, Visalia had arrived back and had given a few soldiers their assignments. They would gather those part of this convergence. She had come to the Technesis as the third block left to be placed. As the work continued, Ryunok looked at his designs. It would definitely challenge them. Part of it would change. Other sections would use the geography of the planet and learn and use it to create different areas of difficulty. It took about a good half of the day before most of the blocks had been blueprinted and placed in their locations. The last 50 blocks was extra adaptium in case the arena needed to grow, but even those had strategic placements. Excelsa was carrying out the 8th before last block. As he was about to place it on the work area, he blacked out. All that could be heard was screaming, Excelsa from fear, Ryunok from pain. The adaptium block had fallen on his knees, crushing them. In pain, he had dropped the atomizer on the block, which began to grow as he tried to grab it in agony. Visalia used the nearby stored water to stop the adaptium, but it was too late. His arms were torn too from the protruding adaptium. In pain, he instructed Visalia on how to use the atomizer to pull the metal back into a block. The soldiers rushed him to the royal doctors. It took another minute before Excelsa was back. "What happened to Visalia?" asked Excelsa. "You blanked out and Ryu is in critical condition. These blackouts need to stop. This time, you were in pain too." The two siblings took the atomizer and left to go wait for news on Ryu. The doctors came out after an hour. "He will be fine. We had to amputate his legs and arms or he would have died from an infection. He isn't in any pain, but he's still under the anesthetic and resting. We will wake him in an hour. Thank the vigil for helping us to get some silicon nectar. It helps to reduce the pain." The siblings were waiting for him to wake up. When he did, his tone was somber, but he was focused on the arena. It seemed it was his way of coping with the immediate loss of his limbs. They stayed till he fell asleep. He had given them the final instructions for the last blocks. Ensuring it was done, the siblings went to sleep. The morning woke them with shouting and screaming. As they rushed to see where all the chaos was happening, they ran, ending up in the bedroom of their father, laying in a pool of his own blood with a slit throat. As Visalia broke down crying, Excelsa spotted a shadow from the corner of his eye. He ran with guards following him. He ran with all his might as he rounded the corner. The shadow disappeared. Whomever it was nowhere to be found. The verge lit up in all shades of anxious orange as he fell to his knees, screaming a deafening no into the void of his pain and powerlessness.